but I'm joined by a wonderful group of very senior accounting and finance leaders here, and we're really excited to talk to you about some of the use cases that we've experienced in our current and past roles, whether those are Clarity or otherwise. I think this is one of the most impactful parts of the conversation that we can have today, which is what are we actually doing about all of this? And for each of you, just hearing from these folks and what they've seen work and things that you can take back to your job. So I'm gonna let each of them introduce themselves. We'll start with Julie here.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Huaru. I'm the Chief Accounting Officer at Engie. Some of you may know the company as Engie's List. We have a marketplace where you can find contractors such as like your plumber, your painter. The company is public and about $1 billion in revenue. Prior to that, I was at MongoDB where I led finance transformation while we grew from about $400 million to $2 billion in revenue. I was working with Michael, who was on the earlier panel. And prior to that, I was head of finance at a number of other technology companies.
Pankaj, great. Pankaj Malik, I'm the Chief Accounting Officer and SVP at Braze. Braze is a customer engagement platform that helps companies deliver personalized, timely, and relevant messages to their end customers using different channels. I've been with the company now for about 4.5 years. I oversee financial close, SEC reporting and technical accounting, treasury, and the traditional finance operations.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jermaine Cotta. I'm the SVP of Finance and Accounting at Bill. Bill.com is a financial operations automation software for small and mid-sized businesses, primarily specializing in AP and AR, spend and expense management services, obviously also support quite a lot of payments. Hopefully many of you are customers or have heard of us. I've been at the company for about 3.5 years, lead all accounting operations functions, just as Pankaj has mentioned in his own world, as well as treasury and tax, procurement, etc. Happy to be here. Exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm Libby. I lead finance and accounting here at Clarity. I joined in November of this past year. I came from Benchling, who actually was a customer of Clarity's, so that's how I first came to know the product, and actually attended the San Francisco summit that we hosted last September kind of undercover while I was thinking about joining, and had a chance to hear from actually Jermaine and some other folks in a setting like this. And the way that people talked about the problems that they had and the way that Clarity was actually making a meaningful impact in solving those was really what made the decision for me. I, like many of you, have been to events like this over the years and heard people talk about like, oh, transformation and RPA and data analytics and all of these things that were gonna change the way that we do our jobs, and just really felt like nothing had actually delivered on that. And you know, we can tell you a bunch about what Clarity is doing, but to hear it from the folks themselves who've made a buying decision, who've gone through implementation, who've seen that value realized in the work their teams are doing, and who want to come here and keep talking about that and keep opting into this relationship with us, I think it's much more powerful. So thank you to each of you. And we will talk a bit about Clarity, but also other AI applications that they're fans of, so that you can kind of think about that whole picture. So maybe with that, I'd love to just hear from each of you. What are a couple of your favorite AI solutions that you've seen in the organizations that you're a part of? And maybe a bit about why.
Sure. I mean, I can talk about a concrete example. Like, so at my prior organization, we implemented an AI tool to automate our contract review process. So the tool was using OCR technology to read the contract, and then the AI technology was picking up the non-standard contract like terms, which need a different, potentially, revenue recognition method. So prior to that, we were using a manual review through a sampling. So we were covering only about 10 to 15% of the contract population. And with the AI tool, we were able to review 100% So to implement it, we had to work really closely with our auditors and keep the sampling going in parallel while we calibrated the tool. We actually implemented a Clarity tool. We were one of the early adopters. We started at about 90% accuracy, but within 2 months, we went up to a 99% accuracy. So that means when the tool was up and running, not only it reduced a lot of manual processes, but as well, it reduced risk of missing something. And in addition, the external auditors were able now to rely on our own processes, and that reduced audit time and audit fees. So it was a good success.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what you've done, I think an area that I have seen is around the opportunity to cash process. As many of you are aware, when sales closes deals, probably 50% of the deals are getting closed in the last month of the quarter, and you're probably looking at even 50% of that being done in the last week of the quarter. It's then the accounting team that needs to pick up this volume, review the sales order, document your rev rec conclusions, create the order forms in an ERP like a NetSuite, generate an invoice and ship it out to the customer. So we were early adopters of Clarity Automate, and we've been using that to do all of our contract reviews. I think the measure of success that I've seen is we're not growing teams at the same pace as the volume of order forms that are being generated at every period end. But at the same time, when you actually see a difference in your unbilled revenue at a period reporting end and improved cash conversion cycles, I think that was a game changer for us.
I could talk endlessly about Clarity solutions, and I have used both Architect and Automate, but I'll give a slightly different example, and not in the order to cash process, but instead in more of the treasury money movement process. So Bill moves a lot of money for a lot of customers, and we also manage a lot of corporate cash internally. These are daily processes. We need to understand the myriad of funding sources, the high volume of transactions that are being processed, the timing of when customers need their money, the different distribution types that occur. And in doing so, we're of course, our primary objective is to make sure we're protecting the customer's money. But while we're holding customers' money, we generate interest income, float, on both the customer's money as well as our corporate cash. And so my team actually spent a considerable amount of time trying to really understand the movement of funds to maximize the interest. However, because of how much time it took to do that, I mean, as you can imagine, moving so much money and really needing to understand all those sources, we really kind of kept a lot of dry powder. We just kept in reserves this cash that earned very little interest. So we implemented some automation technology to expedite that, be able to really anticipate, predict what the funding sources and distribution flows needed to be with much more accuracy and precision. It really enabled us to minimize the amount of dry powder we left in non-interest-bearing accounts, and really helped us generate maybe $10 million of more interest income in the year.
Not bad.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I can share one. So when I joined Clarity, we were on QuickBooks. And earlier this year, it became very clear that we had outgrown QuickBooks. And so we recently went through the assessment of what new ERP system we were going to sign up for, and really looked at, I would say, only the new entrants in the space, wanting to make sure that we're picking a partner who thinks about the world the way that we do, and a product that kind of matches ours in terms of how AI native it is, pace of development, all those kinds of things. So we looked at Rillet, Campfire, and Everest, and we ultimately decided to go with Campfire. So we just went live, essentially, in just about a month. And part of that is kudos to them and what the implementation process felt like, I think, relative to what a more traditional ERP go live would have entailed. We also used Architect that whole way through. We needed to document our current state. We needed to think about requirements for our future state. My team is literally myself and one other FTE. So when Andrew talks about bending the G&A curve, he really means it. And so we did not have time, in addition to our day job, to like do all of that documentation and really go through all of those requirements the way that we otherwise would have needed to. And so Architect really accelerated that process and improved the quality of information that we were able to get to Campfire to make sure that what they were building would meet our needs on day one. So I'm really excited by where this space is right now, and I think for all of us, the number of solutions that we can have in our hands. It's not clean, right? And so as each of you have very bravely leaned into being early adopters, I'd love to hear a bit about like maybe your own philosophy that made you willing, interested. Maybe it wasn't something you wanted to do, but there were constraints or company circumstances that put you in that place. I'd love to hear about that. And then maybe how that compared to what you saw in your orgs and what you had to do to say like, hey, we're gonna be early adopters and we're just gonna step out.
It's a good question. So I think as I think about it, like leaning into AI, like to me it's no different initially than looking at any other like technology investments or transformation project, meaning it's all about time versus effort and ultimately what the return we're going to get on it. And AI is a solution that kind of you can get there faster and potentially have a greater return on your investment. So I think it's important to start small with one very defined project that's leveraging your existing ecosystem, so you don't go and make a big like upfront investment that will require a lot of partnership with like a really large transformation effort. So pick a limited like use case that's going to get like to prove out that it's working quickly and it's adding value, and then involve your team early and make sure that they understand you doing this to free them up to use their time in more value-added, tasks instead of spending that time on repetitive processes.
Yeah, I think similarly, my past is at UiPath, so, I've lived the automation journey for a couple of years before joining Braze. Obviously, just looking at the pain that the teams have to go through and the volume of contracts that they have to review, and, every year you go through the budget cycle and there's a headcount ask. At some point, you've got to draw a line on the amount of headcount that you're asking. That's why we then explored automation. We picked up a use case that was interesting on the order to cash side, implemented Clarity. I think there's a ton of other use cases out there when you've got contract automation. We're looking at other stuff like, can you do the same thing on the procurement side where you've got your sets of T's and C's. You don't need large enough a legal ops or a procurement operations team that's having to review all of your vendor contracts. You have an exception workflow management that you can set up using Automate and take it the next step, which is you've got commitments and contingencies. So now you're also automating some of your disclosures using tools like Clarity.
I've always considered myself a bit of a technology enthusiast. And I think the reason for that is because I've always viewed a process as an opportunity for improvement. And I know while we're not supposed to talk about transformation, it seems like the reason that that's become kind of this, I don't know, a negative term here is because it feels discrete versus it being just a part of the cycle of a company. And so I kind of look at these teams, these individuals that are doing this as really process innovators, right? I always want my teams to be filled with process innovators and always challenging how to do something better. Technology, AI, the kind of evolution that we've gone through is just tools to enable that to happen, but AI is so powerful now because of the speed at which it's allowing us to make those changes and the ideas it is creating in this process innovation journey. And so I think the concepts that both Andrew and Nishal talked about in terms of being AI fluent is really one of the biggest barriers to overcome because it's a hard new education to democratize because it's really changing the way we really look at how to use technology.
I really like this term, process innovator.
Yeah. New team name.
I'll use it tomorrow. Hi, you are all process innovators today.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like our operations within Clarity are not stable, right? Like we're still pretty small and things are changing so quickly that I think it feels very natural for a company like us to use AI dramatically across the organization and to lean into this idea of like constant change because you don't really have an option. But to think about, for each of you, you're working in much larger organizations with much larger teams, much more complicated deal approval processes, like everything about it could make it much harder to actually get a tool in place or to actually get AI in the hands of your employees or maybe on that, like, are there specific steps that you think leaders like you need to take to kind of get that ball rolling, whether it's like partnership with IT or, Julie, you mentioned kind of starting small, like what are some of the tactical things that you need to think about to actually go from, I want to do this to like, it's happening?
Well, so a couple of thoughts on this. Like, I think first, like AI, like any other project, like the finance team cannot do in a vacuum. So I think partnering with across the organization, so partnering closely with your IT team as well as the other business partner to make sure that you're getting the right data to like provide insight is really important. And then like thinking about data as well, I think that's the most important thing before you undertake any AI project is really thinking about the data quality and how you're going to get the data to support like your AI processes. So I think
beyond just the data quality and governance that you're talking about, one of the other things that we've looked at is really looking at the human in loop adoption. Like you cannot remove the human intervention. You can use AI for operational efficiencies. We cannot rely on it today for financial reporting. Your AI models need to be explainable and auditable. I mean, you've got the traditional audit methods. You can validate the inputs, the assumptions, the data lineage, the outputs. But when you're looking at deep language models and the complexities and the auditing of those models, I think we're not there yet. So it's the human in loop adoption, which is important, which we're always leaning in on is, yes, you've got an AI outcome, but you still need to validate and interpret that in your decision making.
That's very true. I think a few things I've picked up from you all as well. I think one is common language. We talked about it earlier, and I think as you are working with cross-functional partners, it is easy to think you have alignment on what you're talking about, but it's really important that you spend the time to really challenge whether you are speaking a common language. The other thing is, I think, solving the right problem. I have absolutely looked at a process. My teams have looked at processes where they've said, hey, we really want to automate this piece of the process. And then when you step back and look at it holistically, we could have just eliminated it. And so the time we spent automating that piece was effectively throwaway work because we could have just reimagined it and done it entirely different and it eliminated that entire section of the process itself if we had just challenged ourselves a little bit more about what the end-to-end should look like. Mm-hmm. And we're going through this, I mean, this is happening constantly and all the time, and I think it is really important to have almost just like agile engineering development, right? You're constantly reflecting and iterating on what the process is trying to solve for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things, that I've been most excited about with what Architect has enabled for us, because right now we need that information for this ERP migration, but as soon as we're done with that, like it's gonna be something else. Mm-hmm. And I don't honestly know today what that thing is going to be, but to create, one, the muscle, two, the documentation and that kind of like foundation for those insights, I think there's rarely going to be a better time in the future. And so this balance of being able to start small, put something in the hands of your employees, get all of that information and kind of build that basis for then whatever that next need might be. And this pace of change is so high right now that who knows what tools will be available kind of when that next thing comes up. But this gives me as a leader the information that I will need and kind of the ability to interact with it in a way that I didn't have before. I'd love for each of you maybe to share something that went wrong. Or we heard earlier about some like POVs, POCs that failed. Please don't malign any of our tech peers. But yeah, maybe something that was not so smooth about the journey that you've been on.
Yeah, I mean, I have plenty of experience to share. I think thinking about it at a high level, like where I have seen things go wrong is like back to the data quality. I think that's one. The second was trying to undertake too much at once. So I think it's really difficult to update a process or change a process if everything is changing at the same time. And third is not bringing the team like along early enough, like underestimating the change management impact and how to manage that, including the training and like post support, like effort that a project would take. And then the last one is like making sure you bring your auditors along early and through the journey with you, so you are thinking about the right things at the right time and that you're fully aligned.
Yeah, I think all projects have their fair share of challenges when you're implementing a tool. I think to your point, getting in your auditors on board sooner rather than later is very important. Besides that, I feel also capturing the right requirements, because oftentimes people want to dabble at AI and use automation, but if you have not mapped out your processes and you don't know what the ultimate goal is that you're trying to reach to and what you're trying to solve for, you tend to go sideways and you start expanding the scope of where AI can go, and you're not really solving for what you had set out your journey to be.
In addition to what I've heard, I mean, data absolutely requirements is such a big must-have in identifying all and continuing to challenge those requirements. The other thing I'd add is knowing how you're going to measure success. I think is really huge. I've had a number of experiences where we set these targets that are seemingly unreachable. It's like we get obsessed with the result of let's do close faster. But nobody really knows what that means, right? Do close faster, there's so many things in close. And so I remember setting a goal that we were gonna shrink close by a day. And you get this almost team paralysis. Like, it didn't happen, actually, when I set that goal, because nobody really knows where to start, and they all are trying to make little incremental improvements, none of which are actually transformative in the close. And so we've actually taken a different view on it in setting a different type of outcome. The result will be a shortening of close, but what are the processes that lead to the length of close that we can all come together and transform together? So, one of the, we now call them input metrics or proxy metrics. We post a lot of manual journal entries. That is obviously one of the things that is going to contribute to a lengthy close. Our accruals process is very long. And so if we measure just that, and not the time specifically, but what about that? We have 100 journal entries that are manual. Let's shrink that, work on that specific thing. Let's cut that down by 40%. And so then it gets everyone kind of aligned around a result that's quantifiable, that will ultimately lead to results. But I think it's really setting something tangible for the teams to understand, because it's a number of things that will contribute to the whole. Mm-hmm. I think that's been very helpful for seeing wins and getting, making progress.
Yeah. Maybe with that, other than close time, which comes up often in these kinds of conversations, examples of metrics or outcomes that you have been trying to drive towards, that you've said, like, let's use AI for that, or this outcome is a reason for us to talk about our tech stack and try to make some changes?
I think to me, it's like all comes down to risk. Like, it's how do you reduce your risk of having like your financial statement like misstated, and like with risk, okay, let's start looking at what creates risk, and it's the number of manual processes that we have, the time it takes, the complexity of those processes. So I think similarly to what German was saying, like, we also went the route of reducing our close timeline, and that wasn't working out. But when we started ranking our processes by risk, manual effort, potential impact to financial statement, then it became really clear which processes we should tackle, first. And leveraging AI was one of the solutions to address like those.
Right. I think similarly to the point that you made, it's more around the operational metrics, the volume of data that you're having to read, contracts that you're having to review, manual journal entries. I mean, we use tools like Kyriba, which has helped automate a lot of our entries because you're really going in and tagging every transaction that comes through the bank statement. So you're not waiting until the end of the month to do your bank reconciliations. You've got real-time reconciliations because every transaction's tagged. And then I think someone mentioned earlier in the audience about intercompany reconciliations being a nightmare. So again, it's a hybrid between using automation that exists in tools like NetSuite and Kyriba is, so it's again volume of journal entries. It's the operational metrics around volume of T&E reports that people are having to review, which really helps us analyze where do we want to drive automation and where do we want to implement AI.
Yeah, we're even trying to use it for things like forecast accuracy, trying to reimagine ways to use predictive AI or other tools to figure out a better output as it relates to certain things like reserves. We have loss reserves that our risk team is looking at losses from an operational perspective and how to underwrite and lend credit, but we're looking at it from a GAAP accounting perspective at the balance sheet level, and those are sometimes disconnected in terms of how you predict what's going to hit the P&L. And so we're looking at ways to improve forecast accuracy using things like AI models.
Okay. And maybe I'll ask one more question, and then I want to leave time for folks in the audience to ask questions of these wonderful panelists as well. Are there other AI wins that you've seen, heard about, that just kind of blow your mind and make you think, like, if I could make this happen for myself, for my team, like, this is a use case that I think is stellar, and I want people to know about it, as they go home this afternoon?
So, I mean, I hate to only do a plug for Clarity here, but what we saw earlier is amazing. And I don't even just mean it from a financial process perspective. I think about this for the entire business. Think about your product development life cycle. Think about your operating motions for the business. I think these things are amazing. Like, I often think about, wow, if we had everything documented and you had a person, but really a machine, really always just monitoring things that were inefficient or things that were possibly breaking in the company. And this is that. Like, it's incredible.
I have to agree with this. At my previous organization, we went through an effort of documenting all our processes because we had done so much changes, and we were worried about single dependency. And it took us 9 months to do that. And now when I see a tool like this, we could have got it done in 2 months. It's pretty impressive, I have to say.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with Andrew earlier. I think just looking at what Automate is doing now, not Automate, Architect, it's a tool that I'd probably evaluated about a year ago, but we didn't make any headway then. But looking at what it is now and the ability to create your SOPs by just having a conversation with another colleague, or even just screen grabs of what you're doing is a game changer. I'm a believer that SOP documentation is an important step, not just because you need it for your SOX compliance, but we've often seen that you're not really growing your teams and you don't have the bench strength. So when you have attrition on the team, you're often scrambling with how do I need to run a process? And if you're able to use something like, Architect to document your SOPs, it's a playbook, it's a checklist that someone just comes in, picks it up, and is able to use that and run with the process. So to me, if I were to be able to do something, it's looking at tools like Architect.
Yeah, but there's so much happening right now in our industry. So I think it's great to come to these events as well to hear about what everybody is doing and what else we should be thinking about for sure.
Thank you for that. I didn't tell them that they needed to talk so much about Clarity. Folks in the audience, we've got a couple mic runners. If you've got a question, we've got a hand up here. Yeah, we've got about 8 minutes.
Hello. Oh, hi, I'm Ingrid. I have so many questions, but I'll limit it. And thank you so much for everything you've shared. But I would like to hear from all of you kind of how you see now the interplay between transformation and AI and how you're kind of managing that, right? Because we always have these huge transformation projects. AI is the quick wins. But I'm just curious how you're managing both as they kind of augment, supplement each other. And part B, if I can, what are you finding as the experience with the employees in terms of feeling more empowered by AI rather than threatened?
I just heard that transformation is dead, so I'm still reflecting on it. I think about it for now slightly differently. To me, AI is one of the tools in my toolbox on my transformation journey. So it's one of the solutions that I would evaluate along with other technology solutions. But maybe 6 months from now, my answer will change. But right now, that's how I think about it.
Yeah. I agree. I think AI has such a broad meaning because there's traditional AI, agentic, predictive, and there's also alignment with transformation teams. Part of their role is collaboration with other cross-functional partners, which might not actually be on the same technology plane, particularly as it relates to solving a finance problem, right? And we talked about data earlier. Some of that data there's a big dependency on cleaning up the data from another team. And so I think that transformation functions, they will have to navigate both because they will have to think about what are the tools that continue to emerge that are available to me to solve problems, whether it be temporarily or permanently. The temporary because I still have to solve this other problem and clean up the data that I need that may need and depend on a cross-functional team that is not prioritizing finance first. And we definitely experience that. A lot of our data is not in a single place. And so even getting those to move into a central repository is a big undertaking that AI is going to need to depend on. So I agree, it's a tool in the kit, but I think it's really about these teams, I think, thinking broadly about the problems that they're ultimately going to solve and thinking creatively around what the process can be versus solving the immediate problem in front of them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think on the transformation side, I still view that as more company-wide, large-scale transformation. I mean, you only have a limited pool of IT spend budget that you can use across company-wide transformation initiatives. I agree that,
You don't have a prioritized finance technology budget?
We do. But again, within that, everyone's excited about driving automation and the initiatives that they want to accomplish. And so AI is a toolkit, which is within your smaller groups, you're able to identify the small wins and be able to automate while the large scale, transformation pans out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Again, obviously, before you start any project, you said the budgets are limited. you're going to your CFO, the board, depending on the type of project. How do you justify the ROI in the beginning? I mean, you haven't even started the project. How do you justify the ROI to the board or the CFO saying this is what the savings are going to be? Any good ideas?
Oh, that's a tough one. We've actually just done this. And it's interesting because I think a lot of board members that are like the audit committee, especially if they're experienced CFOs, they actually know the pitfalls of not implementing technology. So it's probably more likely they'll push on it. The challenge is really more the operators, right? How do we prioritize the spend when you have all this other spend that you want to incur for non-finance outcomes? And sometimes finance outcomes they're longer term, they're scale, they're not immediate revenue generating. We're having these exact conversations as we go through big transformation discussions now. What's really interesting is if you actually do a true value case for it over 3-4 years, you will get a big payback. Whether it's because you will stop the curve of expenses going up, you'll flatten the curve of expenses, or because you will stop revenue leakage, or because you will create a more efficient order to cash process that will enable you to go to market faster. And so one thing we have done, and this has been a really challenging part of creating this value case, because it's not natural all the time to think about, is we've actually tried to build the rationale on the basis of what the business gets out of it versus what finance gets out of it. We definitely get things out of it, of course, but the big selling point, I think, for beyond the CFO, like your COO, your CRO, is what do they get out of it? And so we've actually been building more of a narrative around, hey, this is how much revenue you can unlock. Look at what you could do with pricing if we implemented these tools in this process. And that actually resonates with them a lot more. And you want them on your side to advocate to the CFO. They can sell for you, right? Mm-hmm. Then it's part of their technology objective as well.
And maybe just to add, like when we're talking to current or prospective customers, I think one thing that came up earlier that the conversation needs to start with is like, what are you solving for? What are the objectives that you're hoping to achieve? And then building that ROI case pointed back at that thing, because a lot of these AI tools especially are very powerful and can solve an abundance of problems. You also can end up with the proliferation of a bunch of them across your organization. And so knowing what problem you're solving and then building towards that, I think helps with the starting point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you have your kind of your roadmap and your prioritization framework and you stack rank what is your most important initiative that needs to be addressed, then AI is one of the solutions to solve this. So you already have your kind of what you're solving for and your ROI. And then so let's take my prior example where we had decided to make the investment to document all our processes, and we did it manually, and we spent 9 months on that. I think it would have been a very easy sell to say, hey, it's going to take us like 2 months, and it's, I don't know, $100,000, for example. I think that would have been a very easy sell in that specific use case.
This is not a Clarity endorsed quote. You have to negotiate pricing for your own deals. Okay, we have time for one more question. In the back.
Great perspective. My name is Sham. My question could also come across as a bold perspective, but I'm still going to ask. We went through like SaaS, automation, agentic, right? Do you guys see a world where 2 years down the line, do you need a ERP? Do you need a CRM, right? Like, do you guys see that being a world? Again, like, I come from IT, and we talk to our CFOs. We get a lot of pushback when we do our ERP renewals for 2 or 3 years down the line, right? Like, you guys are in the finance, accounting space, but like, what is your perspective? 2-3 years, agentic versus SaaS, like, how do you guys think about it? And sorry if it's coming across as a bold perspective, but I'm just curious.
I mean, I don't think ERPs are going anywhere, but I think what you can complement ERPs with is, you know, the ability to use AI to interpret your financial results, being able to create variance analysis and being able to get better insights into the data that you're using. But I don't think it's going to replace ERPs.
Yeah. Agree. I mean, ERPs, Oracle has some pretty interesting AI integrations now as well. I think that's really the direction it will go. I mean, your ERP, especially if you're a large company, you're going to need centralized data. And so whether you start that way and can continue to build upon that, you're still going to need reporting, and you're still going to need some tools to do the automation of accounting. And so like ERPs are a great solution for that. It's really a question of whether the ERPs will come along and integrate enough AI features such that it becomes an even more powerful tool in the kit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess having a good, like, just to maybe bring it back around, but it feels natural, having a good understanding of what is actually happening regardless of the system is kind of the starting point for maybe having more other agentic workflows and, you know, minimizing how many people you need interacting with some of these more old school systems. I think it's going to be a very interesting, exciting time for all of us. So we are over time, which is a broken promise on our part, but thank you all, and thank you to our wonderful panelists.